promote that. They draw inspiration from that, and it's so important for them to know this country may have been setting the tone, sadly, on this, but it was isolated instances and rogue judges, essentially. But most of us don't, and we're fighting that. Okay, so the larger thing I did want to talk about today was how do we talk about these issues with fellow conservatives, family, acquaintances, so that they understand we're not coming from a place of hate, but love. This is, to me, where the real fight is. It's like I have to convert conservatives that this is a fight we do need to fight, because political operatives, elected officials, even in Tea Party groups, they say, we can't win this fight, we shouldn't touch it, it's not worth it, let it go. I remember my LA MassResistance contact, she spoke at a local Republican Assembly group, and someone just cut her off immediately and said, there's no point in fighting the gay marriage decision. Don't waste your time. We've already lost it. The train has already left the station. The horse left the barn. It's over. I wish I had been there, because that was really rude in itself. But second of all, I would have asked a very simple question. You know, where would we be today if the pro-life movement had had the same attitude about Roe versus Wade? When that decision was imposed, and that was a 7-2 decision. I mean, gay marriage was 5-4. It was much more, conflicted. But a 7-2 decision, the pro-life movement started. And we've seen 40 years later, we have states that have enacted heartbeat bills to protect unborn babies. Alabama has passed the most, I say radical in a good way, radical pro-life bill precisely to start a fight with the federal judiciary. This is not something we should give up on. This is something that we should double down and fight back against. So, I mean, that's my first response there. I am really glad that this issue came up, because I can tell you, a few weeks prior, I was visiting with some friends of mine in San Pedro. That's a harbor section of LA City. And it was just a dinner with friends. We were talking about the 2020 election. Is the camera rolling? Is everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine.
Not because of me, but what I'm sharing, I want to be other people that have. And the people know about what I do for MassResistance. I have a lot of support from them. And while we're at the dinner table, and the hostess brought up the issue. We're at a dinner table. We're just celebrating, taking it easy, and like the topic of discussion becomes homosexuality. Because I'm there. I mean, whoa, okay. And are people born that way? I mean, the question comes up. And she had a lot of courage to do that. I really admire that she did that. And of course, right away, one of the people at the table said, let's change the subject. Another lady at the table, a friend of mine, she suggested that there is a very small segment of the population that truly is born gay. But it's very small. In the vast majority of cases, homosexuals engage in the behavior for spite or for mental health issues or otherwise. Another person talked about that there are different hormonal developments which occur during pregnancy or gestation. The whole nature-nurture aspect came up right away. But what I like the most is that we're a group of friends at a table, just kind of catching up. We work in different activist circles, and we were starting to ask about this. The fact that I exist means that this conversation is going to start happening, and it needs to. So what struck me the most about those discussions is that most people were drawing from personal experience. They have friends or relatives who aren't gay. One lady who helps our organization even shared concerns about fighting this agenda. Her son is married to a woman, they're having a child, but he's pro-gay. And so my friend is so worried about alienating her son and losing that relationship. And, and I appreciate Laura asking this, how are we going to address this issue in a more polite or friendly setting? We're not dealing with rabid, raging, angry activists. We're not dealing with Steve Patia or Antifa. We're dealing with our friends, our neighbors, our fellow conservatives. Because I get it, nobody wants to be shouted down as anti-gay or homophobic or transphobic, etc. And so the first thing I do have to tell you, if we're going to start talking about this, we really do need to know the audience we're dealing with. Are we talking to people who are willing to listen, or are we dealing with activists, leftists, people who are just not interested and just want to shut down the conversation? I gave you a previous example. The guy blurted out, the ship has sailed, the train left the station, we're not going to talk about this. Okay, so that's someone I'm not going to be able to get through to right away. the better option would be, hey, you may not want to hear this, but other people do. That's the attitude. We shouldn't allow that to silence us entirely. Okay, he doesn't want to talk about it, but others have a right to. So we have to at least, hey, let's have that manifold respect amongst each other. When you get past that, the fact is, you just have to start speaking the truth about this. Plain, simple, calm. You know, this PC cult is not going to silence us. I mean, thank God we have President Trump. This guy has really shattered this atmosphere of imposed silence and self-censorship. It is easier for people to speak their minds, I really believe, in spite of the threats, in spite of the violence we see on TV. You know, people really think that if you speak against this agenda, it means that you hate people. That's simply not true. This is the analogy I begin with when it comes to this issue. You've got to make this case. And I even made it at the press conference. If you have a loved one and that person is dying of cancer, you're going to hate the cancer that's killing that person. If there's a wild animal attacking your child, the more you love your child, the more you're going to beat down that animal that is harassing, threatening your kid. So that's right away how you deal with this. Well, you know, you're just a hater. You hate them because they're gay, and it's like, I don't hate them. I love them. This behavior is killing them. And so, you know, so I mean that's the basis of it. But we have to speak to this issue. No, you're not born that way. No, they're not born that way. No, they weren't born in the wrong body. Now, and how do we deal with this? Because there's always been pushback there. And part of the reason there's pushback is there's never been a discussion about it. It's always been silence. No, they're born that way. How dare you? You should just love them and accept them as they are. Shame on you. And that's just been what's resolutely happened every time. That's why there's been no discussion until recently. So we have to tell, hey, we love them. We care about them. Again, we're in a context, in a company of people who are willing to listen. Homosexuals cut their lifespan short by an average of 20%. That doesn't sound healthy to me. That's not even normal. And here's the thing, even the homosexuals themselves know it. Milo Yiannopoulos, an outspoken gay conservative, I guess for lack of better words, he not only makes this case, but he said it at the first straight pride parade that was in Boston. Everybody, hopefully you're on the listserv for MassResistance, you should have gotten the latest post, which was about first straight pride parade, where there were more police than there were parade adherents, but they did it. The gay lifestyle and the culture is destructive. And you don't have to take my word for it. This testimony from a former homosexual, Alex Aradonis, this was recently published. He had been raised by 2 lesbians and he became gay himself. This is his statement. This is a former homosexual statement about this. Gay culture is a culture of abuse. At its core lies a carefully crafted falsehood. This is a gay guy, a former gay guy. I'm not saying it, you're not saying it, this is a homosexual saying it. Former. You are born that way, that's the lie. Pure and simple, that's the pickup one. This seduction worms into the psyche of vulnerable, targeted children. We all want to care about the safeguarding of kids. That should be common ground immediately. There are people I know who are pro-LGBT, but when it comes to Drag Queen Story Hour, they are offended and want to fight it as militantly as the rest of us. So, this way, when predators lure them into bed, the luring feels like the caresses of a liberator rather than the harms of a rapist. We have to have the courage to say this. This whole born that way lie makes it easier for predators to induce vulnerable people into the lifestyle. You were born that way, it's natural, so just jump into bed with me. This is what's happening. In the aftermath, you live with doubt and fear that the rapist was right. You start to believe that it was something inside you that asked for it, while anyone who points out that your experience was abusive is now cast as an oppressor. So this is part of the outrage that we face when we're saying that homosexuality is wrong, and no, you weren't born that way. The personal experience is so raw for the individuals. And as I had told you previously, many of the people I was talking with at that friend's house, They know somebody who's gay, a parent is, a relative, a friend is gay, and that personal aspect is so deep that it just evokes those raw emotions. That's what we're dealing with, but we have to be able to say, look, this is what's happening. This is what we have to speak to. That account alone, what I've just shared with you, is enough for me to keep speaking out about this. There are people who are hurting out there, and we don't want them to hurt. There are millions of people who have been harmed, abused, neglected, molested, raped, and such trauma damages a person's self-concept. It undermines the truth about who they really are. And the last thing we should do if we really care about love is to enable that dysfunction. That's where we're coming from. You just have to say it, though. It's not going to be easy for some ears to hear it, but that's the way to start talking about it. We just have to say it. How do you kill a sacred cow? You don't kill it in pieces. You just kill it. That's what we're stuck with. Pro-choice versus pro-life. It's a living being at conception. That's a biological fact. It's just being, and just to go back to the example briefly, I said Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford were pro-choice. Part of it is that a lot of people didn't have the biological knowledge or the genetic evidence that we have now. Oh, very much. That person is alive. There is beautiful, living dynamics occurring in a mother's womb at the moment of conception. We didn't know it. Now, if you read the Bible, you'll know it. But even for those who don't, it's now so manifest. This is part of the reason why millennials are so massively pro-life now. The evidence is there. The evidence is there. Now, so I talk about dysfunction. Let me bring up some other things. This will make it easier when making the case. How many of you have heard of Ed Buck? Okay, and one of you. Okay, so this is something else to bring up. He's a Democratic mega donor who lured black men into his West Hollywood apartment, plied them with drugs and alcohol, and had sex with them. 3 of them died under his care, so to speak, or under his, hosting. And now he's finally facing, he's facing prosecution now in federal and state court. This has been a long-standing issue. He's in the Los Angeles County area. I'm not surprised I really shouldn't be surprised you have not heard about it. The media has an investment.
Died. The other one survived.
Two of them died, right?
Yeah.
And one of them survived. He's still homeless, and he was recently interviewed. Why did Ed Buck get away with it for so long? He's a big time Democratic donor. Pictures with Hillary Clinton, pictures with my Congressman Ted Lieu. But this is the culture that I'm talking about. This is not an anomaly. This is usually what happens. This is not like some, accident or some marginal event. So that's something that needs to be brought up. These are high risk, the high risk aspect of these behaviors is not anecdotal, it's common. So here's the thing. We have to start having this discussion as a culture. We just have to. And you know what? It isn't going to be easy because it hasn't been done. That's the way it is. You're going to be the tip of the spear. That's the way it is. Just like that you were telling me, the pro-life fight, they were the tip of the spear. It was seen as radical and crazy 40 years ago. We just have to accept that. It's not going to be easy for us initially. A robust debate about the origins and consequences of sexuality and transgenderism in the mainstream, it hasn't taken place yet. And I submit to you that the reason why is that under real scrutiny, the whole basis of this agenda is easy to expose as a total fraud. It's easy to do it. We can say that the emperor has no clothes, and we make it easier for other people to say the same thing. So we start again. The truth is that no one is born gay. Study upon study has confirmed that there is no genetic element to homosexuality, just as there are genetic elements that baby is a living person from day one. Now, take it from a logical perspective. It doesn't make sense to even say that people are born that way, because procreation is essential to the transmission of genetic information. If people are born that way, they must have got it from their parents. But if there were parents, that means there were parents. There was a mom and a dad that gave birth to a kid. I mean, that's what we draw from that. Procreation is essential to the transmission of genetic data, character traits. Homosexuals don't reproduce. So how can they pass on the trait as genetic? It's just not there. Homosexual conduct is inherently destructive and disordered. And this is part of the reason why in polite society you have to really test how explicit do you want to talk about this thing. Our bodies were not designed for same-sex conduct. Anal sex, otherwise known as sodomy, is the only way that men engage with each other, and the behaviors are fraught with disease. Miriam Grossman is a well-established academic on this. She gives a number of talks on this issue. She testified against teaching LGBT to kids as early as 2012 in the state legislature. She talks about how the design, the lining inside of an individual's rectum cannot sustain any kind of forced interaction. I'm trying to talk about this as discreetly as I can, but our bodies are not designed for it. Let me give you a statement this is from LA Weekly. LA Weekly is an alternative rag, kind of like San Diego City Beat. I think that's the more liberal one. Okay, I don't want to confuse it. Yeah, this is the Reader's. The Reader's is a good one. This story I couldn't find with the Google search, by the way. I had to contact the writer, the reporters to get it, and they were able to send it to me. LA Weekly reports, this is in 2012. 43 years after the Stonewall riots in New York City, gay men still struggle with high rates of drug, sex, and alcohol-related problems. A situation that gay leaders are hesitant to discuss openly for fear that anti-gay factions will use these facts to promote the bigoted view that gay men are sick and disturbed. As I said, the homosexuals themselves know that these behaviors are disordered. The Catholic Church, I don't need them to tell me that they're inherently disordered, but they are. I'm not knocking the Catholic Church. I'm just pointing out, even the people involved in the behaviors know that they're destructive and they hurt. They don't want to acknowledge this because then they have to face some really hardcore facts about this. And again, I absolutely tell them about it. LA Weekly, a liberal newspaper in Los Angeles County, wrote this. The reporter went to West Hollywood and saw this. The people who engage in these behaviors are sick and disturbed. Okay? That's not a judgment. It's just they're in bondage to something that's hurting them. That's why they were recognized as mental disorders for decades. Why civilizations across the board discouraged and even criminalized this conduct. Now, let me give you some statistics. I have all this written down. I shared it with Laura. Every one of you should have gotten it too. WebMD in 2011 reports that gay men are 2 times more likely to have cancers than straight men. The Cancer Network referenced a 60% preponderance of anal cancer among homosexuals. The Journal of Acquired Autoimmunodeficiency Syndrome, this was in 2013, confirmed that homosexuals have a higher number of partners and a greater frequency of sexual partners than heterosexuals. That's just the fact. And the same is true for women, by the way, although the data is a little less concrete. Frontiers in Psychology, 2018, reported that there is a higher incidence of domestic violence among homosexuals compared to heterosexuals. This is especially the case in lesbian populations. I can also add as an aside, in Canada, which has the National Health Service or has their own single-payer system, LGBT groups are militantly critical of the healthcare industry, the healthcare sections, because they point out you are not doing enough to deal with the particular healthcare problems that our community is dealing with. They acknowledge that there are severe problems that are far more represented in gay population than compared to straight population. Okay, and I'll get to some of the arguments that people try to push back. Last of all, the Los Angeles Times, 2018, they reported that, this is last year, folks, so this is not, they can't push you back with, well, you're talking about data from 1970s, 1980s. No, this is last year, this is this year. They reported the skyrocketing number of STDs in Los Angeles County. The vast majority of the syphilis cases are afflicting gay and bisexual men. This isn't hitting straight people. This isn't hitting healthy couples. Now, this to me is the most important thing I can share with you. This is good for whether we're having the conversations with friends and family or when you're out there on the field trying to make sense to the rabid left. These are often the arguments you get. And I would say this is part of the reason why conservatives in general don't want to deal with this. We just don't know how to respond. And it's not fair for me to give anybody a hard time and say, why aren't you fighting this if you don't have tools to respond? I had to learn these. I had to be studying this. Brian Kamaker, the president of MassResistance, I had to go to him repeatedly with, well, what if they, well, what's your response to this? Well, how do we respond to this? What's our take on dealing with this aspect of the issue? I mean, it always come back to, well, I'll just give you the retorts and I'll respond to them. This is the first, okay, this is one of the first things. I actually heard this earlier this year from in a town hall. Animals engage in homosexual behaviors, so what's wrong with humans doing the same thing? It's a very common statement. And you know, this is how I respond. Animals also kill their young, they abandon the weaker members of their group, and this is my favorite, female praying mantises, they bite the heads off their mates after sex.
Yeah.
So maybe the women will be okay with that. But the general idea is animal behaviors are not a standard for human conduct at all. In fact, we always say that we treat animals humanely, right? We don't treat animals like animals. There's this concept, humanely. Being human means to treat others with a certain expectation of dignity. So, I mean, that just dismisses it right there. Well, you know, apes and animals do this. And besides, I mean, that's a simple way to respond to that, but a longer way of saying it is that animals are instinctive. Human beings have choice. We have volition. We're not animals. Let's just not let them get away with that. This is the second one. This is a very common retort. This is what I would say a lot of conservatives and a lot of like Republican establishment politicals will often say. Who cares what people do in their bedrooms? If it's not affecting you and me, why should we care? You know what? That's a pretty stunning statement. You're right. I mean, I was on a radio program in Las Vegas debating this, and I said, I don't want telescreens in everybody's bedrooms. I understand the initial aspect behind this, but we know the consequences of these behaviors. That is public. And let me go this. Okay. The truth is that this agenda does affect us. It's not staying in the bedroom. For example, the federal government spends $35 billion a year on AIDS treatments alone. That's just on AIDS. I'm not talking about syphilis, I'm not talking about gonorrhea or the other host of venereal diseases. That does affect you and me. That's $35 billion that doesn't build the wall. That's $35 billion that doesn't build our freeways. That's 35. So there's an example. We should certainly be talking about the encroaching tyranny. Homosexual activists, they announced early that they were not content with being free from the penalty. It went beyond, don't put me in jail for having sex with another guy. They want their behaviors to be seen as normal and healthy. They expect us to see homosexual conduct on the same level, having the same moral value. And that's just not the case. It's simply not true. I'll never forget this. I confronted one gay activist. This was in a town hall. My congressman at the time was Henry Waxman. And this gay activist, he said it without hesitation. You have to accept me. I will not accept tolerance. He said that without blinking, without hesitation. And I told him, you don't understand the meaning of either. You know, I'm supposed to bend over, figuratively speaking, for your agenda and lifestyle. And you don't understand, this is a free country. But that's what it is. This other argument, well, you know, they're not shoving it in our faces, it's in the privacy of their own homes. We have gay pride parades like all over now. I mean, they're totally shoving it in our faces. And not just the homosexuals, but the politicians who are catering to this for power and prestige. They're totally pushing it in our faces. I mean, we saw that, the signs that were there in Chula Vista. Jesus is coming on your mom's face. Jesus is coming on your dad's back. I mean, they're pushing in our faces. It's not in the bedroom. It's not. These behaviors are now becoming required instruction. We know this in California, but also in Colorado, New Jersey. It's in 4 states, Colorado, New Jersey. I always forget the 4th one. But I mean, there's 4 states that's already pushing. And parents are not allowed to opt out. So there's a lot of talk about opting out right now. That deals with the health, the sex ed curriculum. But kids learning about LGBT people, LGBT history, the fight for civil rights for LGBT, they can't opt out of that right now.
English, science.
It's in English, it's in the other curricula. They're finding ways to force it in. So there's that. And we can go back to 2004. This is what really got me lighted up about this. Pastor Oka Green in Sweden. So this is half a world away. 2004, he went to jail just for preaching against sexual perversion. And not just homosexuality, he preached against adultery, he preached against fornication, premarital sex. Nobody was spared and he spoke it kindly from the pulpit. He wasn't condemning anybody, but he got arrested for discrimination. That was a statute that was in place in Sweden. And I could talk about more recently, Dr. Paul Church of Boston in 2015. He was fired from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center because he told his gay patients that their behaviors were destructive. I talked about Bill Wadcock. I forgot to mention the black pastor who was preaching in Toronto, recently arrested for inciting hatred, just for preaching the gospel. The gospel says, for God so loved the world. That doesn't sound like hate to me, but that's what's happening. Dr. Robert Oscar Lopez, he was forced out of his job as a professor at Cal State Northridge because he defended natural marriage. He had a story very similar to the account I just shared with you. He was raised by 2 lesbians, he was gay himself, yet he engaged in those behaviors. And in California, it's become a mere misdemeanor to knowingly infect someone with AIDS. It used to be a felony. So if you know you have AIDS and you have sex with somebody and that person gets AIDS, that used to be a felony. Now it's been treated as a misdemeanor. And as we know, most of these misdemeanors, people don't even get prosecuted anymore. People steal stuff from grocery stores and don't get stopped because there's so much crime. Whereas on the other hand, you can face a year in jail for repeatedly misgendering somebody in a nursing home. This is tyranny, this is wrong, it's totalitarian. Even the most libertarian or live and let live of conservatives that you're interacting with can't ignore this. I find it kind of frustrating. People like John Stossel don't talk about this. You've got like Federalists they want to talk about the transgender stuff because it's easy to point out a man trying to be a woman is totally insane. But all of this came out of the LGB gave us tea. We can't separate the two. So, and I talked about now we're dealing with children being subjected to perverted men dressing up as parodies of women and indoctrinating them about gender fluidity, queer role models, etc. What we've been fighting now in Chula Vista. And these are not role models. I don't have to explain that to you. This is precisely what we have been fighting against now. They have really gone too far, and I think this is a hill they are going to die because we're fighting back. So there's other things too. I find like the libertarians, young people are really, tempted by that. Live and let live. You can have your gay. Let me have my life too. Besides the tyranny aspect, this is a part that doesn't get talked about enough, and I had to research to be better understood. A strong and stable society, it requires families. One man and one woman raising and rearing children. People who are like, I'm fiscally conservative, but I'm socially liberal. Okay, granted, if we want to have economic freedom, we need to have a reduced state. The role of the government should be as minimal as possible. Okay, fair enough. But a free market isn't just chaos. It's based on faith, credit, loyalty, commitment to contract, association. All of these values have to be taught. And they're not taught by the state. They have to be taught by a mom and a dad. People want a free market. You have to have strong families. You cannot have one without the other. And that's got to be the biggest load of crap that we've been pushed, if I may be so bold, by a lot of Republican Party operatives. Let's be fiscally conservative, let's be socially liberal. Honey, you can't have the fiscally conservative without the socially conservative. We have to have the courage to take a stand for that. And for proof of this, you can look at, you want to throw out a big name. This is one of my favorites. Polybius, ancient Greco-Roman historian. He was an eyewitness to Greek city-states disappearing, imploding, the populations collapsing, the infrastructure deteriorating, the whole civil fabric eroding because of the breakdown of family. He was an eyewitness. And we see the same patterns emerging in places like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, because of the breakdown of the family. We can see it and say, and homosexuality is a big part of that. It is. The mayor of Chicago is is a full-on lesbian, Gail Lightfoot, and she's pushing this stuff militantly. And also back to, so I talked about that. So that all falls under, homosexuality doesn't affect me, why should I care? So there's a lot of things, yes, we should care. These are the reasons This is something else I've had to contend with more recently. I know gay couples who are happy and who have lived a long time. But that's a common refrain too, I get. So what I often respond, those are sad and very far removed exceptions from the statistic epidemiological rule. I know one person who smoked 3 packs a day and lived to be 80. But that doesn't make up for the vast majority of people. If they smoke like chimneys, they die at 50. And again, the behavior is physically destructive. It's contrary to design. I remember when I was getting my teaching credential at Cal State Long Beach, we have to take a health class for teachers to teach the subject matter. And I remember asking the question, when homosexuals engage, is there blood? Do they bleed? And he said very candidly, yeah. The teacher said it without thinking twice about it, like there's nothing wrong with that. It's like, these behaviors hurt. They're harmful. Bobby Lopez, whom I mentioned previously, he's very candid about what the encounters were like. They were not fulfilling, they were painful. And he's pointed out recently, the silence on that aspect of it has made it harder to fight this fight. We have to have the courage to speak clearly. Gay sex ain't gay. It's destructive, it's painful. Women engaging with other women, it's painful, it's destructive. There are cancers as well, even if there's no penetration necessarily. It's the same thing. This is also something I drew from LA Weekly. Here's another quote. This is from one gay man who testified, on the verge of possibly becoming a suicide statistic, one that's far more common among gay men than straight, Brandon suddenly got a call from a friend on his cell phone. That was what saved his life. But the point is that the suicide ideation is so common among homosexuals. And it's not the fault of the country because they're so intolerant. In the most LGBT affirming countries, the suicide rates are high, the morbidity rates are high, just the same. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands. Psychological reports did longitudinal studies on this. Homosexuals die sooner, period. Denmark was the first country to legalize gay marriage, by the way, 1989. And yet, the evidence is there. This is not a lifestyle, it's a death style. So, then of course there's the more hostile things. People will say things, well, gays and transgenders are suffering because of bigots like you. And I mentioned, most LGBT affirming countries witness the most destruction for that population. It's not societal pressure and condemnation, but it's the nature of the physical acts themselves that are destructive. And again, I mean, the knowledge of these acts is public knowledge. Even if I don't know intimately what individuals are doing with each other, it's crystal clear. This is what homosexuals do. That's public knowledge. We're not invading anybody's privacy. It's just a fact. If I smoke, whether in private or public, it's going to damage my lungs. This is another one, and we really have to be better at fighting this one. We hear this too. It's wrong to discriminate. You're discriminating against a group of people. That's not okay. Discrimination is wrong. That's an argument Shirley Weber loves to use.